documentaries are great, I think, as a stepping stone. And I know documentary makers will be mad that I see it as a stepping stone to fiction, but I think it's a way where you don't need many people. You can tell a story with just yourself and a camera. And these days you can do it on your phone. Like, you don't need much of a crew. So it's sort of a nice way, if you can find a story and if you can think of something, find a subject that's unique and you're passionate about, and then it's a nice way to show that you can do it or prove you can do it and sort of explain what you do that's different to other people, things like that. And the key to it really is finding producers who understand the vision, because the people that it's their job to find the financing that isn't attached to any of those kinds of conditions. And you find wherever you go, people want more violence. The complaint we're getting about this latest movie is that there's no assault, there's no rape scene, and people are like, well, it never reaches boiling point. Where's the boiling point? I'm like, what's the boiling point? You want like to see sexual violence? Is that what makes it a movie for you? Like, it's really bizarre. So that's what certain people need, and you have to just sort of work against that and go, okay, no, you clearly don't understand the movie we're making. That's not what we do here. And like, we need to find the money that's not attached to that kind of thing and find people that understand our vision for what we're trying to do. I think it's better. I don't know, it might turn back the other way, but I think we're giving women more opportunities than we used to. And I think we're letting, even just in a very simple way, like directing television, like you can just see more women directing television, which is great, because it's a great kind of training ground to make movies. And so just the fact that more names are being thrown into the conversation and is a good, and I just think if people get used to seeing women behind the camera, then we'll accept it. But just for so long, there was only a few of them, a few women who were doing it, and so it's great that we're kind of broadening it out. I think it's getting better. I'm hopeful.
Hi, how are you? Welcome to Zinemaldiaren podcast, the audio inventory of some of the events taking place at the San Sebastián Film Festival. As part of the 71st edition of the festival, the Tabakalerara Room C hosted a film talk by Kitty Green, who made her debut with The Assistant. The Australian filmmaker came to San Sebastián to talk about her work and present her second feature film, The Royal Hotel, in the official selection. The film talk was moderated by journalist Elizabeth Cabeza.
Welcome, Kitty. So I was just explaining what it would be like quite an informal chat about your creative process, and that we're really, really happy to have you here. You have a filming competition that is screening in a couple of days, so we won't be discussing the particulars of the film just in case we get some spoilers. But we will talk about hopefully about how you went about making it. So first of all, I would like to ask how you got into the industry, because it's not an easy path, and you started with documentaries. So, what triggered your interest to sort of say, yes, this is where I want to go?
You mean in film or
in
fiction?
In films, yeah.
I'm not sure. I was a kid that wanted to make movies. When I was 11, I started making films in my backyard with a little camera. And my mother's a photographer. She teaches photography in the art school. So I was around a lot of... She has good taste in cinema, so she would bring home all these movies. She loves Bela Tarr and Haneke and all these things. And I was way too young to be watching those movies, but I watched them because she'd just leave them on the steps and I'd sort of watch them. But yeah, so then I went to film school, and then I realized I graduated film school and I was, very young, and no one really wanted me to make a movie, I think. So I made documentaries because that was a way to be able to make things, and I didn't need to work with a huge crew. I could do it pretty independently, so I could do it myself and with my own little camera, and I would cut them on my laptop, and I did that for a few years. I made one in Ukraine that did quite well. It went to Venice, and we had a big premiere there, and so from there I was able to get a bit more money to make bigger movies, and then so I slowly got into fiction. I wanted to be in fiction, but it just takes a minute to sort of prove to anyone that you're worth funding, I think.
Whether it's through non-fiction or fiction, film helps us understand the world a bit better. Is there such a difference from a creative point of view when you're dealing with fiction or non-fiction? I'm thinking in particular about Casting JonBenet, where you kind of play. There's this great documentary that I hope you all have seen. Could you tell us a bit what interested you, the case in particular, because I don't know how familiar the audience is with the subject matter, and how you played with the fiction within the non-fiction, with actors playing.
I was making films. It started with a short film that I made in Ukraine with little girls. I was looking at how to make something. This is maybe, I think it's 6-7 years ago. Before it was when the war was just starting up on the east side, and I had made a little short film, and I just got all these drama students, and I was working with these drama students in Kiev, and we made them audition for a film about a figure skater, a Ukrainian figure skater, Oksana Baiul, who won the gold medal. And so they each dressed up like Oksana Baiul and did this performance. And I used the audition tapes. We cut together a little movie out of the audition tapes, and that became the short film. And then that little film it was 5 minutes, and it's just little girls talking about their lives and performing this scene, and in front of a backdrop, very simple. But that film won the prize at Sundance for Best Documentary Short, even though we made it in 2 days, so it was crazy. But we were then, off the back of that, asked about how we would adapt it in America, what we would do with it. You know, people in America, when you win Sundance, want to make everything American. So we made the same kind of concept using a true crime case, like a real life murder trial. It was about beauty pageant queens. So we did this sort of similar thing where we auditioned all the people in the town to play the kind of family in this story, and got people's perspectives on the crime, and kind of blended the two, both fiction and non-fiction, in a way to create something that was about myth and legacy and the way we talk about crime and the way we kind of digest it as a community and things like that. So it was a complicated structure, but it seemed to work okay, and it was pretty accessible. Netflix bought it, and it became a Netflix original, even though it's pretty experimental. But they were, I think, anything to do with true crime they can put on their algorithm or whatever. So it kind of worked. So
it was quite organic then.
Yeah, I mean, it was a natural trying to talk about, I guess, beginning was how do we talk about this war breaking out, and I wanted to, particularly through the eyes of the children, without, and I was thinking about a different way in and a different way to tell those stories that was different, I guess, or interesting. So it was kind of a pretty organic thing, and we just were working with the students, and they came up with this idea, so, yeah.
Have you stayed in touch with some of the people you met in Ukraine?
Yeah, lots of them actually. But yeah, everyone's okay and safe, thank God. But it's very awful right now. And
after Casting JonBenet, you went into fiction feature, The Assistant, which is inspired. In the case of Casting JonBenet, as you mentioned, it was inspired in a real case. In the case of The Assistant played by Julia Garner is this young film professional that gets hired to work in a producing company in New York, and finds herself working for an ogre, really. And it's, inspired in the case of Harvey Weinstein. So, but it's very sort of, this character is kept out of the frame, which I found quite a radical choice and very interesting one too. What triggered your need to tell the story in The Assistant You know, and then we can discuss the point of view of that film as well.
I mean, it was a complicated time. To be honest, it was a little bit about releasing the documentaries and also just trying to work in the film industry as a young woman. It's like people treat you very differently. I could see the way that the men who were making films were being treated versus the way I was being treated. And it's subtle little things that kind of pick at your confidence and make you feel like you don't belong in the room, you know, just in the way someone can kind of, you know, dismiss you or not ask you a question or avoid or ask you who's really in charge. I often got, who's really in charge of your movies? Like, who's really coming up with the ideas? And I was like, I am. And they know, but who out of your producers, your male producers, which one is the... And so this constant like undermining of my like whatever skills, I guess, was upsetting me. And so the assistant is sort of based on this idea more than it is the Weinstein stuff, but it's about sort of more systemic kind of sexism in the film industry and looking at the way women in the office are treated, where just in a very simple, like in very simple little ways, like every scene is about her routine as an assistant in this office. And sometimes it's like the simplest sort of stories I heard. I interviewed actually hundreds of women who'd worked in those sorts of companies. And I was just kind of looking for very simple stories about why. I asked them, why did you, what was it about, I've forgotten the exact question, but it was like, what happened, like what kind of behavior did you see in the workplace what prevented you from climbing the ladder that the men often in your office could climb? And they would say things like they always had to make the coffee, even though they had the same job as the male assistants, they were still in charge of making the coffee and looking after the children. And so they became kind of feminine roles within the system and kind of got trapped in these roles and couldn't work their way up in the same way that all the men did, which explains why there's so few women at the top in Hollywood, I think. So I was looking at kind of what's preventing women from getting into positions of power, and that was kind of the question. And then we hung it all on the Harvey Weinstein case because it was in the news at the time. So by making it Harvey Weinstein's assistant, that's naturally a kind of a topic that people want to watch, you know, and so it's kind of bringing attention to some bigger systemic problem through the sort of lens of that case, essentially. So, yeah, I guess with each film, it's just like me thinking about what do I want to say, what am I trying to say, and what's the most interesting way to tell this story, and you know what will keep an audience or get an audience interested in something that's very boring, like systemic sexism, you know. So it's about finding a interesting route, I guess.
And it's very interesting the way that this character is kept out of, you know, you follow Julia Garner, you know, through the micro and not so micro aggressions that, you know, as you were saying, it's systemic and it's well, it drains your energy, and takes up a lot of space in your head to deal with. So, was that an idea that you thought of right at the beginning, like, you know, this character, because he embodies so much more, so many more Harveys around?
Well, I think it was mostly like, we've seen the narrative about the bad man, like there's so many bad man films, and this was a film about women and women in the workplace. So to me it was always like the women had to be front and center. And then we were making a film, we never say the name of the boss, but we also wanted to keep, we didn't want to directly say this is this person, but also sort of reference everything that was going on. But there was a lot of other people at the time. It wasn't just Harvey Weinstein. There was lots of men at that time that had the similar stories. So it kind of meant it was more universal if it wasn't labeled, and you could kind of just hear the terror of, like, kind of hear his voice on the phone in the other room, like hear how disgusting he was, and you didn't have to fully. But you were sort of in the shoes of the young woman, I guess, and you never had to fully see him, I guess, which I think made it a little easier. At the time, it was very close to the case, like, and everyone was very traumatized, I think, in the film industry that had been there, and all the stories that were coming out, and everyone was thinking, how much did I know? And so it was very sensitive. So we were just also trying to be very gentle and sensitive about the way we were going about it. We didn't want it to feel exploitative and Hollywoody, or it didn't feel like the right moment to like capitalize on pain, but I wanted to tell this story and this side of the story, so we found a way to do it delicately, I guess.
Yeah, there's a fantastic scene in the film where the main character complains to the human resources head about what's going on, and she's questioning the way they are dealing with sexism and work ethic, really. Could you tell us a bit about that and how you went about directing that scene?
Yeah, we had, the whole film is basically a silent movie. There's not much dialogue in The Assistant, but there's this one 12-page scene that's the center of that film that everything sort of hinges around. So it took very little time to write the actual movie, but that scene took quite a while to get the rhythm of it right. And we wanted to set up this idea that often I don't know, do you have human resources like that here?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
But often human resources is designed to protect the company and not to protect the employees of the company. So you'll go in to complain, and then that person who's hearing the complaint is actually working against you. So we were setting up this sort of conflict between the two of them where he's pretending to be on her side, but he's clearly not. And I had this fabulous actor, Matthew McFadden, who's in Succession at the moment and is the best. And he is so brilliant. The thing about brilliant actors is you just bring them in and they do their thing, and it's so great that you don't have to do much. So the two of them were so wonderful. It's like a play because it's 12 pages. Essentially, it feels like a one-act play in some way. So they just kind of did it again and again in different ways, and it just found its own rhythm. And but it was weirdly was a very easy thing to shoot because it's I think when the structure of a scene works, it's easy. I think it's harder when something doesn't work as well, or you're trying to figure out what the scene is. But that had some very clear turning points and things that they could hang their performances on.
And now you have worked again with Julia Garner for the Royal Hotel, which is screening in competition here, and screening in the gala is in a couple of days. What do you like about working with Julia? I guess you understood each other very well in The Assistant.
Yeah, we got along very quickly and very easily, and it was very. I describe it like chemistry more so than like a relationship, more so than like anything, where you just energetically you get along, it just makes sense, and we get each other and understand each other, and she's become kind of, the two of us work so closely, we don't even need to communicate that much anymore, so it's hard for me to tell how much of it's me and how much of it's her and how much I'm bringing, but she, I don't know, there's something about her. People say she's my muse. I'm not sure if muse is the right word, but she's like an avatar, or like we kind of work. She's the body of the character, but I shoot the point of view of the character. So we kind of share the character in a lot of ways, which is kind of creepy and weird, but we become one person and to make the movie. So it's a really lovely thing. I'm really lucky that I found someone. We want to keep making movies together forever. I don't know if it's going to get boring, but we're very tight and close, and it's a nice collaboration. Yeah.
And since you made The Assistant, I think it's 2019, if I'm not mistaken, do you sense that sort of the male chauvinism in the industry, and thanks to the Me Too movement, do you think it has really changed over these last few years? Is it more a matter of, it looks better, but is it really?
I think it's better. I think it's better. I don't know, it might turn back the other way, but I think we're giving women more opportunities than we used to. And I think we're letting, even just in a very simple way, like directing television, like you can just see more women directing television, which is great, because it's a great kind of training ground to make movies. And so just the fact that more names are being thrown into the conversation and is a good, and I just think if people get used to seeing women behind the camera, then we'll accept it. But just for so long, there was only a few of them, a few women who were doing it, and so it's great that we're kind of broadening it out. I think it's getting better. I'm hopeful. Yeah.
What else would we need to change in order to
Gosh, so much. Yeah, I don't know. It's a messy. Every system is messy. I was talking about this last night about festivals and who gets accepted and who gets rejected and the way it all works and distributors and how political it often is and how someone can kind of get rejected but their distributor's strong enough to pull them in to get accepted, and like it's sort of every system is messy. The Academy Awards are really messy. It's very messy. So I don't know, I think we just sort of try and create what we can, like little beautiful works of art within this gross system, and that's really all we can do, I think, for the minute until we have a complete kind of overhaul.
Do you share experiences with other women directors in terms of, you know, their sort of interaction with the industry?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but you also hear, I remember when we were financing the Royal Hotel and we sent it to a company and they said, we're going to have to say no because we financed 3 female filmmakers last year and those films didn't do very well. And it's this crazy idea that you're seen as the female filmmaker rather than the filmmaker, you know, so they can't take a risk on you for that reason. So you hear things like that and you're like, ugh, like it's so impossible. But there are people, like somehow I got this movie, it's here made, even though we had to cut the budget down and cut the weeks down, and it was filled with compromises, but we were able to get it done. And I think maybe 10 years ago we couldn't have. So, you know, it's getting a little bit better, one step at a time.
Yeah. It's certainly in the festival circuit we get to see a lot more films, but I think, you know, a lot of the time, I guess it's, well, how you select the films, but also the fact that these films get made in order for them to get selected. So it's more, you know, it's not so much a matter of having a certain number, ensuring that you have a certain number of films in competition. It's probably at the base that things have to change, right?
Exactly. That's why the insistent was about the whole system. Is like we need more women working in these companies so that we can get more films greenlit. Like, and so if you stop the train, sort of, there's a lot of women at the Weinstein Company who were never promoted and never got any chance to do any kind of real producing, and that was their dream. And so the more kind of female producers we can have, the more female filmmakers we can have, like the more everyone will kind of support each other, I hope. So it's trying to change it all, is what, like from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, because even film students, when now they see that, you know, who's in charge of the cinematography or the, you know, sound and producing and directing, then it's not a matter of thinking whether they will be able to do it. It's because they see.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think it's that thing of going, when a man in a leather jacket like walks in and says, I'm a filmmaker, like people believe it, you know, and I have to like prove I'm a filmmaker all the time by like explaining everything I've done, and like it's like always this big act of like, okay, well, I do this, I did that, and everyone's always like, oh, you have a movie. I'm like, yeah, I have a movie. And they're going, oh, who's distributing it? And I explain who's distributing. They're like, oh, you really got a movie. But it's always this kind of it takes people a minute to realize that's what I do. And I think we're just trying to change it so it's not such a battle, you know, would be lovely, like, so it's easier. But yeah, it's a silly little complaint, but you know what I mean? It sort of all feeds into this sort of system that makes it hard.
What's your favorite part of the process when you start a project? What do you know? How do you go about work? And you know, I don't know if there's a particular, I don't know if it's the pre-production or the actual shoot. You know,
I like writing and I like visualizing what it will look like, and then I also like the technical. I'm very nerdy. I like technically mapping out shot lists and figuring out how to cover a scene and where to put the cameras and how to capture that moment, and like I kind of like the geeky stuff. But the rest of it's really hard. A lot of it's about like dealing with egos and dealing with schedules and weather. Like there was so much rain on that Australian movie and we kept having to push, and we lost like 3 days in the beginning of the shoot to weather, and we didn't have makeup days, so we have to squash the rest of the film down. It just becomes compromise after compromise, and you just hope you're making a movie and that the movie will work, but often it's just like shooting's very painful, I think. But there's something amazing in it. It's just like there's so much mess to get through, I think, in order to find that beauty in whatever you're doing. But yeah, sorry, I'm being very negative. I should, maybe it's the jet lag. Sorry.
That's life.
Yeah.
Are you? You said you make very elaborate sort of shot lists, and are you very meticulous in that? Do you allow yourself some margin for improvisation during the shoots?
I would love. So here's the thing about the budget level I'm at. I would love to improvise, but because I'm given such a little time to cover a scene, I often have to figure out exactly how I'm going to cover it before I even get into it, because there's scenes in the Royal Hotel where they're so long. There's 14, it's set in a bar, so there's 2 girls working behind the bar, 14 people sitting at the bar, 30 to 60 people in the background, and I'm having to kind of cover a scene where one of them walks around the thing, says a thing, so it speaks to that person, comes back, speaks to that person, comes back, leaves in 5 hours. And I'm like, okay, so close up there, wide there, close up there, that's 5, that's 6. We can probably do 5 hours. We can probably fit 6. We might not because of the extras, so it might be 5. So if it's 5 and we can't fit that, maybe we cut that and make that a 2-shot. And it becomes this kind of really, because of the limited time, it becomes very, very technical and very like there's not much room for play. And I think because we lost those days to weather and things, that was particularly. But the whole thing, I'm having meetings now about the next project, and the first thing I say when I sit down is like, I need more time to shoot, because I just want, there's magic, there's extra things that I could have probably found, but I just never had the time to get them. And on the assistant, we probably had a bit more time because it was contained. It was all in one space. It's one actor, basically, a few others.
And indoors, you didn't have to worry
no
so
weather.
much about the rain.
Yeah, and so that's actually the best advice for a first feature is make it contained and indoors, because you can kind of pull it off. But yeah, it just was really hard. So I'm hoping I keep getting, whatever, as I hopefully keep making movies, that I get more time to really try things and experiment and throw the plan away, and go, okay, but that's more interesting if we go this way and that way and whatever. But yeah. But I like storyboards. I like little images. I like to have thought it through, and that's sort of the way I've always worked. I do little doodles, with little like weird shapes and things, and that always
do you do
helps
it yourself?
I used to do it myself. On the last movie, I got someone to do it because I had worked on a TV show, and they had a guy, and I asked him if he could do it as a favor. But I used to do them myself, and I don't think there's much difference, to be honest, between his is more realistic and mine is maybe more harder for other people to understand. But they're both sort of similar to me. But yeah, they're good to send to the crew often as well, just being like, okay, this is how we see it covered. Yeah.
And you were just mentioned that you would advise people, when they are making their first movie, to keep it contained. What advice would you give somebody who's trying to, make a career out of filmmaking, or maybe even what advice would you give yourself when you were thinking about becoming a filmmaker?
I think it's about, documentaries are great, I think, as a stepping stone. And I know documentary makers will be mad that I see it as a stepping stone to fiction, but I think it's a way where you don't need many people. You can tell a story with just yourself and a camera. And these days you can do it on your phone. Like, you don't need much of a crew. So it's sort of a nice way, if you can find a story and if you can think of something, find a subject that's unique and you're passionate about, and then it's a nice way to show that you can do it, or prove you can do it, and sort of explain what you do that's different to other people, or things like that, and sort of just be able to kind of show. It's sort of, they call it like proof of concept, essentially, that you're able to in the next one have a vision for something. So I always say start there if you can, or like more experimental things, there's so many short films, so the ones that stand out are the ones that are a little different and that are trying something new and we haven't seen before. So the more you can sort of try something new, the better. And then I feel like often the best way into a feature is by having the strong short that is a sort of indicative of what the feature could be, or thematically similar, or whatever it is. And then you can kind of, raise finance with the short as sort of a document, essentially, that shows the film.
You were born in Australia, but you moved to the US and you've been working there. How does one deal with the American industry, which is quite overpowering when you look at it from the outside?
It's fun. I thought that disappeared. I don't know. I've been lucky enough to just be able to do the things I want to do. I haven't had to. I'm not one of those people, because I write my own stuff. That's another thing. If you can kind of create your own work, it is more attractive to people to kind of make it. I feel like when you're accepting scripts, I get sent a lot of scripts, they're all terrible. Like everything in Hollywood is awful. Like it's just floating. They're really like, you're reading them going, well, who wrote this and why and what's the point? And there's so many of them that come in like that. So I've kind of given up on reading things, and now I just like work on my own little ideas and try and figure them out. And if that means bringing on a co-writer or someone to help me flesh it out, that's sort of a nice way to do it. But yeah, the system is kind of messy, but I often have to make ends meet financially. I had to do a few TV jobs, but I actually learned quite a lot from doing that as well. I did a little TV show. I directed 2 episodes of it, but I did it because Isabella Eckloff, who has a film in competition, she had directed an episode of it, and so had Julia Ducournau, who did Titane. So the 2 of them had directed episodes of the show, so I was like, okay, well, if they've done it, then I can do it. And it was great. I learned a lot. It was for M. Night Shyamalan, the director of The Sixth Sense, his show. So he kind of was hiring directors he thought were interesting that worked with tension, and it's a very tense, dark show. But I learned quite a lot from just how much that crew, they had so much money on that show and such a big crew and such all this technical stuff that was like I would never have access to, that just would have cost a fortune. So that was a kind of a great learning ground. But more than that, I just try and do my own thing and hope people will get on board.
Could you give an example about like what you learned? You said you can learn a lot on a TV set, on a TV series set. Is it like being lent a very expensive toy for a while?
Yeah, that's what they say. It's like getting the keys to the Ferrari and being able to drive it around. Because it's like honestly, it's also just having the time. Like, again, I was never given the time to try things and shoot things and try different. And on that show, they have you can spend days on. I'd had a dinner party scene with 8 people. I'd never shot a scene with 8 people. But a scene with 8 people is very, actually, technically difficult when you get into. I'd messed it up a little bit, and I'm glad I did, because I learned a lot from messing it up, which it was about, because you often need. It's such a weird thing, but the camera really can tell if you've got a certain look or in mind, and if a character gives another character just like a sideways glance, like often you have to make sure that's covered in a certain way. Like there's tiny little moments that make up a scene, and it's just making sure all those bits and pieces are covered, and all these, it's very technically crossing the line and figuring out how 8 people speak to each other and who speaks where and how much coverage is over his shoulder, her shoulder. Like it becomes this very almost mathematical exercise. But I think I learned a lot from doing that and probably failing at it on that TV show, so that I could go into my film and succeed, because I knew what not to do, essentially. So, yeah.
And could you tell us a bit about the shoot in Australia of the Royal Hotel? Because, well, you alluded to it earlier, and dealing with the rain and explaining maybe, knowing that we haven't seen the film yet, but how did you go about, going back to Australia to shoot, and what was the experience like there?
I wanted to. My mother was saying, you have to make one Australian film, and I thought, okay, so I'll think about what that film could be. And I saw a documentary that was set in an outback pub, and it's about 2 Scandinavian, I think they're Finnish backpackers, and they're backpacking, and they take a job in a pub, and they're serving beer to the local mining community of men. And so it was these 2 foreign women in this town trying to figure out the customs of it, trying to figure out if these men were joking, or is it a threat, is it a joke? Like when they say that, what does that mean? So the documentary is really interesting in that way, and I took that concept and I spoke to a company, Seesaw, actually at the Berlin Film Festival, but they have an office in Australia, one in London and one in Australia, and they said, is there an Australian idea? And I mentioned this documentary and the idea that maybe we could adapt it, and they thought that would be cool. So they let me do it. And the problem, though, in adapting it is if there were Scandinavian leads, which they were written as Scandinavian leads, you can't get the financing because it's a foreign film if it's Scandinavian leads, whereas if they're American leads, then you get more money. And so it is this weird thing of, again, compromising to go, okay, well, what does that mean if they're American? And so then we thought, maybe they're Canadian, and then it's less America, you know? So we were sort of playing around with how we could get around that idea, but also get that extra piece of financing we need from the US. And Julia, I wanted Julia, the same actor, to play the role, so that kind of made sense that she could play the part. And we took these two Americans to Australia, we put them in the outback, and we shot, I think, for 25 days. And it was mostly like a remote pub in the outback, so it's just a pub by itself. There's nothing else basically around it. So we found an abandoned pub that we shot the exteriors in, and then we built the interior because we couldn't afford to keep the crew out there. It's hard to, also it's really hard to be out there because we had to be split over all these different towns because there was not enough of a town to accommodate us. So it's kind of tricky logistically. So we built the interior of a pub in the studio in the city, and then we kind of did, but then we lost a couple of days to weather again, and so it was a tricky shoot, but it was pretty great. Like the energy on there was really amazing, even though it was hard. It was like, I think we knew it was something different, so we were kind of excited. The girls had a great time, you know, being like thrown into the middle of like real Australia, you know. It's like not like Sydney, it's like very different. So it was fun. I think, the movie's a little cheeky, it's a bit provocative. I don't know how it's going to go in here, but I think it's, hopefully people enjoy it, we'll see.
And do you think in terms of themes, in terms of things you want to share with the audience, beyond the sort of the fascination for the creative process and maybe the visual aspects of your films, I think you were hinting at that when you said, when you were thinking about making The Assistant. Could you elaborate a bit on that? It's like, you know, how you would like to sort of contribute to sort of a different view of, even if it's a small portion of our sort of damaged world.
I mean, I think both films, both The Assistant and The Royal Hotel, are about women in the workplace, and they're both kind of horror movies. Not really, but you know, they exist in this thriller space, and it's about the kind of, it's nothing big happens in either of the movies really. It's about these tiny moments where, as a woman in a space, not just a woman, but as somebody in the space who doesn't feel like they belong, can feel uncomfortable. And it's sort of about the film sits in that discomfort of going, I don't like this person, I feel uncomfortable, but I don't know if I should speak up about it, I don't know if I should say no, I don't know if I should leave, I don't know how to deal with it. So it's sort of, the entire movie is about these kind of strange interactions that you can have. That is particularly in an outback pub, it's sort of men versus women, and men kind of staring at you in the kind of weird world out there where it's sort of like there's less rules and sort of anything goes. With a little bit of alcohol, everything can kind of spiral out of control. So yeah.
And is that the way you want to keep going, like, you know, exploring this, you know, the idea of, you know, women at work? Would you like to sort of, is that a topic you would like to go back to?
I mean, I feel like if I did a third one that I might get into, like everyone might get a bit sick of it. So I would like to do something different next, but I'd love to work with Julia again, so we should find something. But I don't know, I like looking at, I think, because in documentary, basically, with the documentary you have to stay wide. You kind of can't, to pick up the action, you can't really zoom in on the details because you'll miss something, you know? And so in my fiction work, I really try and stay close, and that becomes about really tiny moments, about sort of gestures or looks or, you know, tiny like words and things that you don't know if they mean anything or not. And it's about kind of interpreting your space, if you're safe, if you're not, what's going on. And it's all sort of, both films sort of hang on Julia's very expressive face, and she can kind of do not much. She's got these big eyes and do not much, and it says so much. So I'm able to kind of express my own fear of the world essentially through her kind of eyes. So that's kind of worked quite well for us now. So we have to figure out if we're going to do a third one, what are we going to do to like blow it up and make it different? And I also want to just break her down and do something really different, challenge her as an actor to sort of rise up, I think. So yeah, we'll see.
Well, you know, critics will be talking about your trilogy.
Yeah, exactly. Ideally, we'll see.
Okay, so maybe it would be good to ask the audience if anybody's got a question. There's one question over here.
Hi, Kitty. Was it daunting returning to your native country? You know, having had success overseas, was that kind of weird, a bit scary?
Not really. Again, this is the thing about being a woman, is no one thinks you're that successful ever. And so like I can go back and they're like, oh, you're making a movie. I'm like, yeah, I've made a few movies before, but still people assume it's the first movie. So it's weird, but I often get away with a lot because no one has any expectations. So it's sort of it was weird. But I don't know, I found some producers who had done a lot of good work before, and Seesaw had made Jane Campion's movies for years, so they knew their stuff. So I had them around me, which makes it a more legitimate kind of production. It's like, oh, it's a Seesaw film, so so people got on board that way. And then it was about just figuring out how to depict. If I'm going to make an Australian movie, how do I want to depict Australia, and how do I want to? And it's a very dark movie, but I don't think it's that negative. I think of its portrait of there's still like a lot of beauty in the landscape, and there's still like a lot of kind of positive aspects of Australia in there too. So I feel like it was more about the representation and making sure I got that right. So we haven't actually screened it in Australia yet. We've screened it there because we cut it there, but we're screening it there next month, which we're opening the film of like a couple of film festivals there. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm excited about getting it back there, to be honest.
So it's not Picnic at Hanging Rock?
No, it's not as romantic as that's for sure.
Okay, any other questions? One here.
Hi, Kitty.
Hi.
I like to know how is your creative process with the actress in whatever of the two films?
Yeah, I mean, so Julia doesn't like to rehearse that much. She comes from television. She did a lot of television when she was younger. She did Ozark on Netflix and like big shows like that. And she kind of actually avoids it. So I set up all these rehearsals and she just doesn't bother showing up. She wants to do something else instead. But she has a process. So we end up, what we do is more than go through the scenes is we discuss a lot about the character, what she's going through, what we see, the kind of sort of like where the arc of the character is, like emotionally, where she's at, here, there. By here, where is she? How broken down is she? Or how? So it becomes more just conversation, I guess. I think theatre is probably similar, where you just discuss it more than until you get up on your feet. But that sort of discussion is really important. And then I think with both films, they're about work. So it became a lot about, can she even pour a beer? Like, so did a lot of like, we took them to a bar and taught them to tend bar, and in the assistant we took her to an assistant's office and taught her to like, it sounds crazy, but a good assistant knows how to like open a box in like a second. It doesn't take, so just getting her familiar with the routines and making it look like she knew what she was doing was really important. So it's often like the technical stuff plus the discussion is enough that when she gets on set, she just gets it, and we don't have to communicate much. Once we've kind of had those discussions, we just go, which is partly why we can get the film shot in such little time. It's because there's a lot of, we've sort of pre-discussed, so we really don't need to have those discussions there on the set. We can just keep going. So it's a very nice. But I worked with Hugo Weaving from The Matrix and everything. He loves to rehearse, and it was a very different process where he and the partner in the movie, Ursula Jovic, the two of them loved rehearsals. So we did really beautiful, detailed rehearsals, like really blocked everything through. They knew exactly where they were going to be in the space. They knew every detail. And that was the way he likes to work. He's very granular in that way. And I think really the job as the director is just to figure out what they need and then what gives them, makes them their best, and just follow that lead. And then with the girls, they were cool. They were like, we'll just turn up and hope it works. And that's fine. You just have to sort of trust their process a little. I guess it's just discussions early on about how do you want to work? How do you want to do this?
Hi, thank you. So, Kitty, hi. Thank you for the conversation. Given the fact that your movies have a feminist theme or view around them, have you ever been pressured by people providing funding or future distribution or marketing to adapt or cut out some scenes or relax the tone?
Yeah. And I had an actor, we wanted this actor for the Royal Hotel, who's a big, very famous actor, and he said he'd do it if we changed the script, so in the end he could save the girls and he would be the winner. And we were like, no, that's not, it's kind of very against the very film we're trying to make, so we had to say no. But I think you have to find, the key to it really is finding producers who understand the vision, because the people that it's their job to find the financing that isn't attached to any of those kinds of conditions. And you find wherever you go, people want more violence. The complaint we're getting about this latest movie is that there's no assault, there's no rape scene. And people are like, well, it never reaches boiling point. Where's the boiling point? I'm like, what's the boiling point? You want to see sexual violence? Is that what makes it a movie for you? It's really bizarre. So that's what certain people need, and you have to just sort of work against that and go, okay, no, you clearly don't understand the movie we're making. That's not what we do here. And we need to find the money that's not attached to that kind of thing, and find people that understand our vision for what we're trying to do. And so it really becomes, and you have to have great producers who will get rejected 500 times in a row and keep looking for money that in the places that you wouldn't expect it. And the assistant especially, no one wanted to finance that movie because everyone had worked at in the Weinstein Company, everyone in Hollywood, and they were all afraid of it. And so we found independent financing. We just found a bunch of different pieces of money from different people, and we put it together, and we were able to get the tiny amount of money that we used to shoot that movie. But it's about being very creative about where that comes from, I think. Because, again, there's so much pressure to make something really awful and exploitative and gross, and we have to just sort of work against that. Yeah.
Speaking about financing, do you think you have to fight harder for bigger budgets? Because this is a complaint when talking to a lot of women filmmakers, either in Spain or elsewhere. It's it's difficult to get big budget, even when you've proven your talent and your competence.
Yeah, and then journalists will come up to the women, and like myself, there's a few of us making these kinds of very movies that are in one location. Like this movie, The Royal Hotel's in the pub, basically. And the assistant's in the office, and they say, oh, why do women always make these really realistic, natural realism movies? And it's well, no one gives us the budgets to build a set and to have the costumes. A sci-fi costs $10 million more, naturally, because of all the stuff. So we're kind of a little, I don't know, just stuck, I think, a little bit, because no one wants to risk the next level of money on us. But it's tricky, but I think you just have to find, this is why I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out how to tell a story in a way that is achievable in some way, that isn't too expensive, that is telling the story but telling it differently, that will make people sort of sit up and take notice. And, so I think a lot of it's that, the kind of the initial concept is the strongest thing, and then hopefully you get a little bit of money and you can do it.
And as you said, be able to retain control.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Kitty. It was so refreshing, your honesty and the precision of your words. So thank you for that, first of all. I just wanted to ask you, because you were talking just now about the critical role of the producer that will keep on, searching for those financing sources. Maybe I missed it, but how did you find a producer while you were working? Because you were working in TV, right? Having different
but
jobs.
I did that afterwards. I honestly found my producers, and it's often luck, and it's like at the festival like this, talking to people, in your car, or whoever, in the same restaurant, or you know what I mean? It's sort of this, that's sort of almost how it works. But again, it's like a chemistry thing where you have to find someone that understands what you do, who is good at what they do, but it's really complicated. But the main producer I worked with, I was at a documentary film festival, and he was there, and we had a mentorship day, and you meet mentors, and he was one of the mentors, and I was, meeting all the mentors, and he had made Harmony Korine's early movies like Gummo and There's a couple of them, Julia and Donkey Boy, and I was like, okay, well, he's clearly a weirdo if he makes Harmony Korine's movies. So that to me is like, okay, he's interesting, and he seemed to get what I did, and had some interesting ways to look at financing, and so it's almost like finding someone with the right taste, who shares the same taste, and someone who's connected enough that he was able to get our other producer on, who has more access to finance. Like, so Scott, who I was talking about, isn't really a finance guy, but he brought on James, and James can get the money. So it's that kind of, they know generally you've got to find a few people because they all have different roles. But most of all, it's just people that creatively, that's the most important thing, is that you trust their vision, or at least their track record, what they've made before, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned you were having meetings about your next project. I know you sort of said you're trying to stray away from workplace, but I was wondering if you could give any more details about the next project that you're working on.
I wish, I don't really, I mean, don't even know what it is. I've got like all these things that I think are interesting. I think I start with like little aspects of human behavior that I think is interesting, which can be almost like an encounter with someone. I'm like, well, that was weird. And what did that mean? And was that, and it's can be such a little thing, but often that's where I'm like, oh, that was kind of interesting, and maybe that could be this. And Julia, I met with her, and she was chatting about actors she'd want to work with, and so that kind of helps because you can kind of picture, maybe she would maybe that person and Julia could be good together, So I think it's a bunch of things that move around and then eventually crystallize into something that feels real and something that feels like, also that can sustain. The hardest part is making it sustain 90 minutes or, longer, and figuring out something that actually has, often you have the greatest idea, but it just doesn't feel like it could be a movie, so you're kind of trapped with it. So yeah, I think it takes a few things to kind of get it working. We'll see. I'm half Ukrainian, and I did want to make something there, but I'm trying to figure out how to do that sensitively and in the right way, and so that's that's on my list, but we'll see when's the right time to kind of approach that, and yeah.
And emotionally, how are you dealing with
I'm okay. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are in Kiev and are living their lives as best they can, and so I stay connected with them as a way to feel like, but it's sad. It's a really awful situation for everyone.
Hi, when you made The Assistant, were you looking for silence, and which elements achieve that silence?
Yeah, right. I mean, we were struck by how silent it was when we started shooting it. And Julia kept saying, it's a silent film, like I have no dialogue today and I have no dialogue tomorrow, and so I think she worked in TV, so she hadn't done that before, so it was kind of, all of us were sort of trying to make sense of it, and we got into the edit, and I cut the first cut together, and I realized, there's no sound. And I didn't want music, because I think music can be very emotionally manipulative. I try to use it sparingly, because I feel like my films are about how should I feel, and as soon as you put music on them, it's telling you exactly how to feel. So I try and build soundscapes out of natural sound. So The Assistant, we got all these sound effects of photocopiers and buzzing like fluorescent lights and groaning pipes, and kind of built this sound. So it's kind of silent, but there's also a lot going on, and you can really ratchet up tension with that sort of sound, like sirens outside, things like that. Like, it's very simple, like even like hissing and whirring, and like if things slowly lift in frequency and they get louder and louder, or like more and more higher and higher, it really changes sort of the balance of the tension. So yeah, it's sort of silence, but it's never silent. You know what I mean? There's always a lot packed into each moment.
And in a way, were you alluding as well to how silent people had been? That was the thought that crossed my mind the first time I saw it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about people that stayed silent when they needed to speak up. So yeah, exactly. That was sort of all built into the messaging, I think.
Hello, Kitty, and thank you very much. Compliments for The Assistant. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that your mom was dropping around films by Bellatar, Haneke, and stuff like this. In the future, whose films would you drop around in your metaphorical or literal home for your metaphorical or literal daughters to see?
Yeah, that's interesting. Probably the same ones my mother left for me. I remember like the piano teacher was on and the thing about the piano teacher is my mother rented it. It was in a Blockbuster video case, so I didn't know what it was, and I put it on, and the first shot is like an aerial shot of her hands on the piano, and it's incredible and it's beautiful. And we actually use those sort of shots in the assistant a lot. It's the girl on the keyboard, and so it's this sort of, it was immediately an influence. So I don't know, it would be a similar kind of thing. And Jean Dielman, Chantal Ackerman, is very much an influence on the assistant. Like, it's about routine and gesture and just being a woman and living your life. And it's sort of a protest movie in a lot of ways. And I think that was a huge, influence on us. So all that stuff feeds into my work now to the point where I kind of have to acknowledge it as my own stuff, like my own things that I would reference or, tell others to watch.
Are there any other names that come to mind when, in terms of, that have been fundamental in the way you approach filmmaking?
My mother is such a strong voice in my head, so I can just think about names my mother yells down the phone when I'm shooting. She'll call and say, "Darling, Jessica Hausner, composition." And Jessica Hausner, her composition is beautiful. Like, every frame is like a painting. The way she kind of puts a frame together is really absolutely like unique and gorgeous, and there's that, and she says Bellatar atmosphere, it's like about sounds and like lyrical whatever. I don't do enough of that stuff in my movies, but because no one I think will finance me making an 8-hour movie. but I love all that stuff is sort of things that she repeats, and so that kind of ends up sort of sitting in the back of my brain and probably making me anxious, so that I'm like trying to prove myself and I'll never be as good as them or whatever. So I'm trying, but yeah.
So when you screen when you premiere a film at a film festival, it's not so much about what the critics will say. Are you worried about what your mom is going to say?
I only care about my mom. I don't care about anyone else. And in fact, I read the reviews because I know she reads the reviews, and I want to know what she thinks of the. So, but she hasn't seen it yet because I'm too terrified to show her. But I'm reading every review and sort of, because I call her afterwards, and I know when she's read the bad one, and I'm like, "Oh, Ma, they just didn't get it." I'm trying to explain it. I'm like, turn into a child. but yeah, it's a weird relationship. But
and how do you feel about sharing your work with the audience, and then having to sort of discuss the film, and does it change in any way your perception of? Because it's a finished film, but then it's the audience that actually finishes it with their interpretation, isn't it?
It's weird, isn't it? I mean, because The Assistant was released during the pandemic, and so it was like a weird one where it was hard to tell how people were registering it, and only now. It was actually a little bit when they released She Said, the movie last year about the Weinstein Company, that people started talking about The Assistant again in that context, and that kind of changed the way I viewed it. And there's been a lot of love for it now when I'm releasing this movie. People always talk about The Assistant too, and I finally realized, I didn't even know if anyone had seen it, so it's nice to know people have watched it and know that it's part of the discussion. And but yeah, it's sort of like you make it, you throw it out there. People think all these different things and tweet all these different things, and you just have to try and it's sort of separate from what you do. But I also think the movie belongs to everyone. It's not just mine, and so it is. The mess it creates sort of informs whatever I'll do next in some way. Like, if everyone's complaining about X, then I might not do X again, type thing.
Okay, well, I think our time is up. I just double-checked. So thank you so much for your insights. And thanks the audience for these fantastic questions.
And so ends this new episode of Zinemaldia podcast, a space included in the activities of the Thought and Discussion area. You can listen to more film talks and master classes on our website or on your favorite audio platform. See you next time!